So they've done this in a number of US cities, and it's using techniques that the South African police have been using. So if you can just go to the next slide. And this is just really to summarize some of the studies that have been done. So in Kansas City, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, Bogota in Colombia, and Cali in Colombia, we've seen quite significant drops in firearm crime. So this is not just only homicide, but it's firearm crime. And the issue here is very much around if you have a specific type of policing, you can reduce firearm violence in areas that are affected by high levels of firearm violence. And you can just go to the next slide. Also, we're starting to see research coming out of Brazil, particularly in the case of Sao Paulo, because Sao Paulo in recent times from 2000 saw a massive homicide drop of around 70%. And we have a number of studies which I've just located there. A few of them were PhD theses, which are trying to explain it. And for them, firearm controls are important, but the key issue they put up is the manner in which they're enforced, and it's very much around how the police have tackled it, and the police have made a difference in these respects. But as I say, this is where the research is, and so we know a lot about policing, but we don't know a lot about the other effects at the moment. So in a way, it's like shining a torch down a dark alley. We can get an idea of a certain aspects of firearms control, but we don't really know about the others. Just finally, if you go to the next slide, so South Africa has invested a lot in policing on this. We know in terms of its flagship operation, Operation Sethunya, where a lot of police resources were allocated. We know, plus minus 14,000 firearms were confiscated then, over 1 million rounds of ammunition, thousands of arrests. Now, this isn't the only operation, but this was a very targeted operation nationwide, and there have been many other focused operations since then. Go to the next slide. So just 2 more slides. It's really, in terms of when I look at this issue in South Africa, it's probably a combination effect of controls. It's speculation, but on the basis of what research we have in South Africa and internationally, it probably is a combination, but we need to understand this more. But I think it's an important thing to note, in the Center for Disease Control within the US, there was a comprehensive review of existing studies that have been done on firearms control. And this was looking both at more rigorous control, but also at self-defense type interventions such as concealed carry and others. And they came up with the conclusion that it's insufficient to determine the effectiveness means that we do not know, a finding that evidence is insufficient to determine effectiveness means that we do not yet know what effect, if any, the law has on an outcome. Not that but we've seen some work of sort of Richard Matsopoulos and MRC who's suggested in his modeling, his statistical modeling, that policing, particularly before 2004, may be the kind of one of the answers to the question about why we're seeing firearms drop from 2000. If you can just go to the next slide. If we start looking at this is data that I've used from the South African police. If we try and sort of compare confiscated or surrendered firearms with firearm homicide, the totals of the actual numbers of firearm homicides, we could potentially see a correlation here. We obviously need to explore this, and these are kind of policing operations that have gone into areas of high crime violence, particularly homicide violence, and engaged in operations to seize firearms in those areas. No effect on the outcome. So the issue here is we need to understand more, we need to explore more, but the general trend is in countries with high levels of violence that firearms control legislation can have a positive effect in terms of reducing firearm homicide rates. And it's just really, as a final slide, just to kind of suggest and to think about a more targeted evidence-driven approach to reducing firearm violence. And it's about asking questions about where are the greatest concentrations of firearm violence? What are the main drivers of this violence? Who is mainly responsible for this violence? How and where do they acquire their firearms and ammunition? And I suppose the question that flows from that is, if one puts controls in place that affect that particular supply of firearms, where will those individuals go to get other firearms? And then finally, what are the most appropriate responses? So I think this is very much me with an academic hat on, saying we know some information, but we need to know more. And I think the plea is that we need is kind of urgent, more focused study on these particular aspects to get a much more accurate reflection on it. And the biggest challenge to us in terms of research is, and to be critical of the police, is that it's very difficult as researchers to access police data on this particular stuff. You know, I think researchers and members of the public want to understand that data on firearm violence is just not available to us. And I think that's, an urgent point, that we need to get access to that particular information so that we can start answering some of these questions. Thanks, Alfred. I'd like to leave it at that.